As is our practice, we dedicate the learning that we do to the swift release and identification of our hostages, right? We hope that in the zchut of our learning, the cholim and the pitzuim, our soldiers who have been wounded on the field of battle, will receive a refuat hanefesh, refuat haguf, certainly for the safety of our chayalim, wherever they may be. I've added another category that in the zchut of our learning, we hope that we have the safety for Achinu B'nai Israel, who are endangered really in all points around the world. And as we enter into Adar Bet and enter into the holiday of Purim, we hope for a swift victory over modern-day Amalek, biyachad ninatzeach. So I'm very excited tonight because we are going to start a new Sha'ar, a new gate, right? It's called Sha'ar HaBitachon, which translates into English as the gate of trust. Obviously implied in this is the gate of trust in Hashem Yitbarach. And over the course of our learning, we need to figure out exactly what it means to trust in Hashem. For the moment, I would just like to leave it as bitachon, untranslated, and we will figure out what it means as we go along. So just to remind everybody, because we've been off for seemingly a long time, but it's only been 2 weeks, that Rabbeinu Bachya organized his sefer in a series of gates. And he says that one gate leads to another. You might say like going to a railroad, right? You go through one car, then the next car, and the next car. A better image might be when one would go up to the Beit HaMikdash. You would go through a series of gates until you reach the final gate, which was the Sanctum Sanctorum, the Kodesh HaKodeshim. And similarly, the Chovot HaLevavot goes through a series of 9 gates, and its Kodesh HaKodeshim, the pinnacle of where it wants to reach, is the Sha'ar of HaBitachon, how we can accomplish a relationship with God. And Rabbi Bachya says the following in Source 1. Since our previous treatise dealt with the duty to assume the service of God, I deemed it proper to follow it with what is more necessary than all other things for one who serves God, placing one's trust in Him for all matters. The reason being that the great benefits this yields both in religious and secular matters. Now, we are going to explain this idea of benefits in terms of Sha'ar HaBitachon, but I want to take a moment to suggest a different way that we could understand how he organized this book. And this way, I think, is even a little bit more useful to us and our quest to fulfill what we're calling the emotional mitzvahs. Now, the reason I want to take time out is because after 15 or so shiurim, I'm afraid you are now at a point where you're saying to yourself, so what? Am I really closer to Hashem than I was in the beginning, right? And since that's the point of the Sefer to begin with, then what have we accomplished up till now? But I think if you group the gates together, a different picture begins to emerge as to what Ibn Pakuda is trying to teach us, right? In my approach, he has organized the gates into groups to address specific questions. At the end of each group, we can then go on to the next question, to the next level of understanding. And I believe he has grouped 3 or 4 gates in each category, and each category addresses the following questions. That I have the why, the what, and the how, ending with the last gate of Ahavat Hashem. Let me explain. So the why, we have completed 3 sections or gates of the Chovot HaLevavot, Sha'ar Yichud, Sha'ar HaBechina, Sha'ar Avodat Elohim. In other words, these sections together established for us the rationale why we are doing this. Why are we obligated to serve the Kadosh Baruch Hu? Sha'ar Yichud logically established that God exists and is the creator of all. Sha'ar Bechina told us if we wanted to understand his essence and his majesty and his glory, we needed to search in our world and in ourselves. Sha'ar Avodat Elohim explained that service needs to be proportionate to the brachot we receive. And we discovered that given all that we receive from the Borei Olam every second of every day, this level of obligation far exceeds our ability to return. At the end of the level of why, we are left off firm in our understanding that we are obligated to serve the Kadosh Baruch Hu, but we really don't have an understanding of what that service entails, right, regarding these emotional mitzvahs. Or in other words, now that we know that something is expected of us, what is that exactly? And the next 4 gates do that. So before we go into the what and the how, I want to mention and kind of justify what I think gives me the ability and the chutzpah to kind of say this is what I think, even though it's not how it's presented by Ibn Pakuda. So there's a very famous story. Are you familiar with the Hebrew poet Chaim Nachman Bialik? Okay, he was an early Hebrew poet, one of the founders and introducers of Hebrew, along with Shalom Chernichovsky and Natan Alterman, right? So he had a series of poems. They were all part of the Odessa crowd who made Aliyah. In fact, here is Netanya fact for you, that down across from the Kikar, I don't want to tell this, but I love the story, across from the Kikar was the Heichal Tarbut. They're now redeveloping it and going to tear it down. It was a beautiful, beautiful building. I don't know what they're going to do with the structure. Anyway, it was built in 1936, I think. It was built even before the shul. And the first program they had was a poetry reading by Chaim Nachman Bialik. The second was also a poetry reading, but by Shalom Chernichovsky. Anyway, so Bialik was at the Hebrew University. He was sitting in on a lecture regarding one of his poems. At the end of the lecture, he went up to the professor, he shook his hand, he said, "Thank you very much." He says, "I've never understood that poem until now." Once somebody creates a work, it stands on its own, and it's open for other people's interpretation, and the own on the authors is only one of many. Now, that's Bialik. So then you can say, okay, so what gives you the chutzpah to kind of think about Ibn Pakuda, who's a god? What gives me the permission? And it's actually Rabbeinu Bachya himself gives me permission. He says, when my brother, this is in the introduction to the book, when my brother, you have read this book and comprehended its theme, take it for a remembrance. If you find an error in it, correct it. Any omission, complete it. Judge me leniently if you find any mistake, flaw, or whatever other shortcoming in its topics and words. For I have hurried to compose it and did not tarry because I feared that death would overcome me and prevent me from my goal of completing it. So he has opened the door, in my opinion, to interpretations, insights. So what is the what? We start the what tonight. The next 4 gates, Sha'ar HaBitachon, Sha'ar Yichud HaMaaseh, Sha'ar HaChaniyah, Sha'ar HaTshuva, constitute what it is we need to do. What are these mitzvot? And these are the foundational principles to fulfilling all of the emotional mitzvot. And the how is obviously the next 2 gates, which is called Sha'ar Cheshbon HaNefesh and Sha'ar Pritzut, which describes what we should do, what is the process that we need to follow to accomplish these mitzvot. Practical guidance, which will eventually, all of these 3 things together, lead us into Ahavat Hashem. This journey isn't easy, and we take our next big step tonight. So just as I said, there's the next big step in terms of bitachon. Are you familiar with the term bitachon? I've heard it before, right? But before we talk about bitachon, there's another concept that often gets mixed up with it and sometimes substituted for it, but it's very different. That is a concept that we call emunah, right? So what's the difference between bitachon and emunah? So before we go further, anybody want to take a stab at it? Trust is which? Okay, so what is emunah? And what's the difference?
Belief, and the one is something that you actually can do. And that times going to relationship.
One's passive, one's action. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. I mean, but you hear those terms all the time. Let's see how it plays out. So a few weeks ago, in Parshat Bishalach, right, the crossing of the Red Sea, we read the following pasuk: "Vayar Yisrael et hayad hagedola asher asa Hashem b'Mitzrayim," and we saw the great power that He extended over Mitzrayim. Vayaru ha'am et Adonai, and we feared God. We were on the level of Yira. Vayaminu Adonai, we believed in God. U'b'Moshe avdo, and Moshe his servant. So what does it mean that at that point they believed in God? So in order to answer that question, you have to answer the question. This is great for preparation for the Seder. I know we're not even at Purim yet. But what is the purpose of Yetziat Mitzrayim? Why did God, through all the pyrotechnics and plagues, to bring us out? Clearly, He could have done it much more simply, and we would have been out. But He wanted to prove a point. And the following two psukim, although there are others, if you look at source 4, it says, Vayomer lemachar, Vayomer kidbarecha. This is talking about after stopping the plague of tzvardaim, of frogs. Liman tedu ki ein Hashem Elokeinu. In order for the world will know that there is nobody like God. Later on, in the other place, it says, "V'hifleiti bayom hahu et eretz Goshen asher ami omed aleha levilti hayot sham arov leman." Right, I'm going to set apart the land of Goshen, where we were living. The plague was not going to impact there. Leman, why? Teda ki ani Hashem be'ekerev haaretz. For the world to know that I exist and I am active in the world. The purpose of Yetziat Mitzrayim was to reintroduce the Kodesh Baruch Hu onto the world stage and to have everybody understand, acknowledge, and accept not only that Hashem existed, but everything we know about Him and what He can do is true. It is an intellectual understanding and knowledge. Leman teda, so you will know. It's all here. And we can interchange the word emunah with yediyah, right? Faith with knowledge. To believe and to know and to accept. By Yam Suf, we had reached the level, we had come to understand that there was no denying that the Kodesh Baruch Hu rules the world, and He stands alone as God over all. Right? That's emunah. So you can have emunah without bitachon. Right? I'll give you a, for instance, carrying on this example of Yetziat Mitzrayim. So Paro had emunah. Paro understood that there was a God. He understood He was a power in the world. And the Medrash says that when He threw our babies into the Nile, He did that in a calculated way because he knew that the Kadosh Baruch Hu punishes midah keneged midah, and he had promised Noah that he would not bring another flood and would not punish by water. So he figured he was safe. That is a level of emunah. It is an acknowledgement and an acceptance and a knowledge of the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Bitachon, clearly he didn't have. Okay. So within our context, the first three great gates that we have gone through have established for us the level of emunah, right? It established for us an understanding that God exists, Sha'ar Yichud, right? And that everything we know about him is true. That's what we established in Sha'ar HaBitachon and Sha'ar Avodat HaElohim, right? But as the Chovot HaLevavot has just told us, emunah is a base level. Emunah is a stepping stone to bitachon. So now that begs the question, which is, what's bitachon? So, simply put, bitachon is that wonderful feeling of not being in charge, and the acceptance of the person who is in charge has your best interests at heart, right? And he is going to look out for you, and you don't have to worry. So I have two examples. I used to go to India for work. Now, the first time I went into a cab in India, it is terrifying. It is perhaps the most scary experience I have had, right? I am in this car and people are cutting each other's offs, and there's auto rickshaws and there's cows and people are honking their horn. I did not think I would come out. But then I looked out the window and I saw that none of the cars were banged up. All of the cars were in good shape. And I said, they must know what they're doing. So I just sat back, closed my eyes, and I was confident that I was going to get to where I was going. I'll give you another example where I really learned what bitachon was. And that is from my friend Elisa. Elisa was a Chinese evangelical believing Christian who went through a very difficult out with cancer. And whenever I would ask her how she was doing, she would just look at me and say, God has a plan. And she was serene. And I would tell her, could be he has a plan. I said, I don't like this plan. I would prefer a different plan. To which she would just laugh, right? She just, and throughout this entire process, you could tell that she was just at peace, right? That's bitachon. So my friend Elisa aside, there are really two approaches that Chazal tell us about feeling confident in the future and what the Kadosh Baruch Hu acts in the world. One is by Rabbi Akiva, and the other one is by Rabbi Akiva's teacher, Nachum Ish Gamzu. So there's a very famous story about Rabbi Akiva that I'm sure you're familiar with, but I'll go over it anyways quickly. It says, Ki had the Rabbi Akiva have ke'azil ba'of, right? So Rabbi Akiva was a wanted fugitive, and Rome was looking to kill him. So he was on the road, and he was looking for refuge in a certain city. Mata lahi mata, and he asked if they would hide him there. And they said, no, we're not going to hide you here. It's too dangerous. And they sent him out to the field. And Rabbi Akiva's expression was called the Abed Rahmana Letab. Whatever God does, he does for the good. And as you may be familiar with the story, that the only thing he had to his name was a rooster, a donkey, a candle, right? And that's it. That's all he had. He had a torch. And during the night, the wind came and blew out the torch, and a cat came and ate the rooster, and a lion came. I happen to be an expert now on lions, actually, back from safari. The lion came and ate the donkey. So he was left with nothing. But during that night, Roman legions came and went into the city looking for Rabbi Akiva. They couldn't believe that they wouldn't hide him there, and the Romans killed everyone in the city. And whereas when Rabbi Akiva woke up and saw that everything he had in the world was gone, he said, Kol da'avid rasmana l'tava avid. Everything God does is for the best. Now, what that says is that God does things that look bad to us and are bad, but he has an ultimate high purpose. His teacher, Nahum Ish Gamzu, has a very high level. I'm not going to bring the story. It's in Masechet Anit. But he used to say Gamzu Latova. That's why he was called Gamzu, which means that God doesn't do anything bad. Everything he does is inherently good. That is a very, very high level of bitachon, one that Rabbi Akiva couldn't reach. Because if we look at our world, and we specifically look at the world around us today, very hard to believe that we can find that the occurrences are inherently good. It's much easier, although not easy, to adopt Rabbi Akiva that says bad things happen, but ultimately there's a plan and something good will come out of it. Now, Rabbeinu Bafya, what we read earlier, tells us that living on a level of bitachon b'Hashem has tremendous benefits for us as individuals. And prime among these, he calls something called menufat nefesh, which translates sometimes as peace of mind, sometimes serenity. There's another translation I found that translates it as peace of soul, right? Which I think might capture it better. So he writes, what is the essence of bitachon? Bitachon is peace of mind of the one who trusts, meaning the individual. That one relies in his heart that the one he trusts in, meaning the individual, relies on the Kadosh Baruch Hu to do what is good and right for him on the matter he has trusted him with, according to his ability and understanding of what will further his good. I mean, think about the world we live in. I think about the anxiety that we have, and all we take on to ourselves. And if we can reach this level of bitachon, we can live in a state of serenity and peace of mind and quietness of soul. That's the outcome of this mitzvah. Okay? Now, he says in order to develop this level of bitachon, we have to accept and work on 5 things. 1, that the Kadosh Baruch Hu knows what we need, and he knows what's good for us. Right? The way I always think about it is that when you bring your car into the dealership, they do a better job because they made the car. Right? He made us. He knows what's good for us, and he knows what's good for us as individuals. The other is that we have to believe that Kadosh Baruch Hu can actually deliver on his promises. Third is we have to believe that he has our best interest at heart. that he will keep his promises, and in reality, that he will over-deliver on his promises to us, meaning that because he is merciful, because he's gomlei chasadim, as we say, that he will give us over and above what he told us he will be. Now, we're going to talk about some of the issues we have to get over to get to that point, right? So the question you have to ask yourself is this a mitzvah or not? Is it just a good idea, feeling? I mean, this is something we really need to pursue. And why is that important to us? So it's important, number one, because we've entitled this series The Emotional Mitzvahs, so at some point we have to find mitzvahs, right? And if it is a mitzvah, that means we have to pay a little bit more attention to it. That means that this is something we are obligated to do. So Ken had said, right, bitachon is active. It's not just passive. It's something we need to do. So is it a mitzvah? It would seem, according to Rabbeinu Bachya, that it is. So in his introduction to the Sefer that we talked about some 15 or 16 weeks ago, says we're following its source 6. Among the positive commandments of the duties of the heart, to believe the world has a creator who created it from naught, that's yesh mi'ayin, that there is none like him, that we acknowledge his unity, that we serve him in our hearts, and that we reflect on his wonders and his works, and these may serve of evidence of him. Next is that we place our trust in him. One of the mitzvot that we have to do is bitachon, that we humble ourselves before him. We're going to get to that gate, that we revere him, and that we fear and feel abashed when we consider that he observes our outer and inner being, that we long to do his will, that we devote our acts to his name, that we love him, and those that love him in order to come close to him, and we hate his enemies in similar duties which were not visible by the senses. Now, we'll get to the other ones, but it's clearly, according to this, a mitzvah. And there are others, like Sefer Charedim, that says it is a mitzvah in itself. Others aren't so clear. The Rambam does not list it as a separate mitzvah. Rabbeinu Yonah lists it in a way that I think is really insightful. He says that it is part of another mitzvah. We have a mitzvah that when our soldiers go to battle, they shouldn't be afraid, right? And why shouldn't they be afraid? Because you'd have to be an idiot to go into battle and not be afraid. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't fear the enemy. It means that you should have confidence that the Kadosh Baruch Hu is on your side and that he will, right, for his own reasons, bring about the kind of victory and outcome that is needed in the world. So Rabbeinu Bachya continues, and he says that bitachon is not only a mitzvah in and of itself, but it is also a foundational mitzvah, meaning that in order to do all the other ones on our plate, we need to master this one first if we really want to reach our ultimate goal of fulfilling the mitzvah of Ahavat Hashem. So the Vilna Gaon says that it's much more than that. He says that having bitachon in Hashem Yitbarach is not just a stepping stone of the mitzvahs, but he says that it is the purpose and the end result of Torah. If you keep all the mitzvot, where you will end up is on this level of bitachon in Hashem. We keep the Torah, in other words, to teach us how we can attain this level. So he kind of has a cute way of approaching it, And what he does is he says it is, I guess, literally hard-coded in the Torah. He said that if you look at the word Breshit, right, obviously Breshit bara Elokim, the first words of the Torah, it is Rashi Tevot. They are initials. So Breshit is Bet, Resh, Aleph, Shin, Yud, Taf. So what do they stand for? Bet? Come on. No. What are we talking about? Bitachon. Okay. Resh is Ratzon. It means will. Aleph is Ahava. Shin is Shtika, is silence. The Avot tells us that there's nothing better for learning than silence. Yod is Yira, and Taf is Torah. That's the reason for creation. So fulfilling the mitzvah bitachon is the foundation stone of Torah. And if you look at it other ways, the reason that the world was created and the reason it continues to exist. So we had talked about earlier that there is a group of benefits that attend keeping the mitzvah or fulfilling the mitzvah of bitachon. And the Chovot HaLevavot lists them out. But I think I'm going to not just give it a list, but I'm going to try and draw out some of the learning so that we can begin to incorporate it in our day-to-day. So he says that, number one, bitachon has benefits to us physically and spiritually, in our bodies and in our souls. And it's worth taking a second to think about that. Right? When we think about doing the mitzvot, we're doing something for the Kadosh Baruch Hu. He goes, since the Kadosh Baruch Hu doesn't need anything, this mitzvah of bitachon is solely for us. Okay? So in addition to this sense of serenity or peace of mind or quietness of soul, the Chovot HaLevavot goes out to list out other benefits, right? Like I said, both spiritual and physical, of reaching this level. And the truth is, we all have bitachon, right? We all as a species, are hardwired to trust and rely on something. And we have to, right? We cannot survive as a species without it. So on a physical day-to-day level, we have bitachon in the natural laws of nature, right? I mean, the Borei Olam set this up so that we could rely. If I took and threw something up in the air, which I will not, it will fall down 50% of the time, 100%, right? And a lot of the brachot that we say in the morning talk about the things in this world that we can rely on. We say, Hamechin mitzadei gaver, right? That he prepares us the ability to walk, right? We walk on the earth and we don't think we're going to fall through. Sometimes they do. You have sinkholes, but in general, the earth is solid and we can walk on it, right? We rely on that. We know that these are 100% true, right? But I also need to have bitachon in my social survival too, right? I might have bitachon in myself and my abilities, right? I might have bitachon in other people. I might have bitachon in wealth and assets, right? And the Chovot HaLevavot says, if one does not place his trust in God, he will place his trust in something else, right? Because we need to trust. We need to have bitachon. And whoever trusts in something else other than God, the Almighty will remove his providence from such a person and leave him in the hands of the one he trusted. So with Bechirat Chopshi, the Kadosh Baruch Hu allows us to follow the path that we choose. And if we want to rely on money or government or ourselves, the Kadosh Baruch Hu says, Shkoyach, see how that works out for you. Now, the reality is that this raises a theological problem, right? Is it true that the Kadosh Baruch Hu would abandon us to hefker, to, I don't know how to translate hefker, to chaos? And the truth is that it doesn't mean that he leaves us on its own. What it means is that it's a kind of a hester panim. We can no longer see his hand and we think we're in charge, right? And that's the worst of both worlds, because we get all of the responsibility and the anxiety and none of the control in our lives, right? And the Kadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm going to show you what it's like to be self-reliant. Right? And he gives two examples of typical substitutions that people make. One is relying on themselves, right? Our own abilities, whether they be physical or intellectual. And the other is we tend to put our trust in our assets and our money, right? That we think money is going to give us security. We're going to give us happiness, certainly, but give us security at a minimum. And he says that by doing this, right, it's dangerous because material possessions are ephemeral and fleeting, right? And they easily disappear. Anybody who I remember I was, in 2008, I was working for Citibank. And as a good employee of Citibank, I was in the stock plan, and it was in my IRA. And in 10 hours, the stock went from 50 to 97 cents. Right? Gone. So he says if he relies on this wealth, it will be removed from him and left to somebody else. Or he'll be prevented from benefiting from it. We had a friend who forgave himself everything, kept his money in the bank, and was niftar early, and nothing he had saved went to him. So it's also possible that money will cause his destruction, right, and ultimate downfall. We see a lot of times, even the Torah in Dvarim tells us, "Vayishman Yeshurun Vayevat," when we become successful, we tend to take responsibility or credit for what we have, and we leave the Kadosh Baruch Hu. We, as a people, right? I don't think you need to think beyond your host countries, right? Countries where you've come from, and think about the state of the Jewish community there and what's happening, because it's pretty consistent, whether it's America or Australia or South Africa. Right? So, on the other hand, having bitachon only in the Kadosh Baruch Hu has several category of benefits to us in our avodat Hashem. And obviously, the first and foremost is we don't need to worry about having to suck up to or appease other people, right? He calls this serving other than God. So we can put this reliance on our fellow man in perspective, right? Because they don't have any power over me, and the Kadosh Baruch Hu is who is ultimately providing for me what I need, right? And I don't need to worry about currying favor or trying to impress them. And as I saw it put, it liberates us from the straitjacket of needing to please other people and the burden of needing to thank and repay them. Now, that is not to say we shouldn't be grateful to people. We should. That doesn't mean we shouldn't get along with people and work with them. But we shouldn't feel this sense that they control our lives, which sometimes you do feel, certainly if you work in a corporation or you're working with other people, that they are in charge. Because they're not in charge, right? The Kadosh Baruch Hu is in charge. So things like we working to win their approval or flatter them, he says the following. He says it will allow us not to go against our principles and do things that are inconsistent with our service to the Ribono Shel Olam. So the HaLevavot who is a commentator on Chovot, HaLevavot, gives the following example. So he says that it means that we do not have to go to their time-wasting parties. And when I went over this, it brought to mind all of the corporate Christmas parties that I made myself go to out of corporate pressure, right? Under this, I still may go, but I'm not going to go because I'm being forced to. There may be good and sufficient reasons to attend, but feeling compelled to is not one of them. We don't need to put their priorities first or be afraid of disagreeing with them. If we think they are wrong, we can speak up and say they are wrong. We should not be shy about humiliating them if it's necessary, right? And we will not try and be like them because we feel that we have no choice, right? It liberates us from that because they're not in charge. We have a different backer. He also says the following. He says our relationship with our assets change, with our money, with what we have. So I have my friend's mother, Aleha Shalom, used to say, I've been rich, I've been poor, rich is better, right? But if you live on this level of HaBitachon, then you have to change it to, I've been rich, I've been poor, it's all the same, right? It's all part of the plan that the Kadosh Baruch Hu has for us, for me. And if you think about it this way, you have to understand that what we own as assets aren't ours. That is a very important thing to get by, right? You're drawing on a bank account of a rich relative who has an endless supply of money. The relative says that you can use it for your purposes, but you also need to do certain things with it that he demands you to do, like giving tzedakah, right? So if it's not your money, then you don't feel bad giving tzedakah, right? Because it is what allows you to use the rest of the funds, right? And according to Rabbi Bafia, you would do this happily, and as he said, with a gracious spirit. If, on the other hand, you do not possess wealth, right? And you know that your financial standing is being controlled by the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and what is happening to you is because that's what he wants to happen, then you might say, well, I don't have to give tzedakah, right? I'm being freed from giving trumas and maasros, right? And you may be spared from the burden of having a lot of money. Now, I know the great philosopher Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof said that money is a curse, and he says, if it's a curse, may I be smitten with such a curse that I may never recover. But Masechet Avot, leaving Tevye aside, says, Hu Hayam there, he used to say, Marbe basar marbe riba, if you excess of meat, you have worms. Marbe nesafim, marbe da'agar, if you have an excess of possessions, it just adds to your worries. Marbe nashim, marbe kesafim, if you have an excess of women, then you run the risk of witchcraft. I'm going to skip over that to a shiur on avot, that if I give will address what that means. Marbe shfachot, marbe zima, if you have an abundance of female slaves, then it leads to promiscuity. Marbe avadim, marbe gazel, if you have an excess of slaves, you have an excess of theft. So excesses of things are not necessarily the best thing for us. And we may understand it. But there's another change that I want to point out, that he says that once you get to the point where you understand and you accept that the possessions you have are not yours, and the wealth that you have not yours and belong to the Kadosh Baruch Hu, you begin to realize that our status is not defined by our money. So let me explain. So there is an adage that money changes people. And I think we've seen that. It can make them arrogant, and it can make them believe that because of the balances they have in their bank, that they are somehow better than somebody else. Right? One of the understanding is that the Kadosh Baruch Hu provides us with what we have, is that this transformation doesn't happen. And what we have is really just a deposit that he left with us to use for specific purposes for a limited time. Right? So even if one remains wealthy, it's not going to make you arrogant vis-a-vis others. So you're not going to lord it over people. Right? Specifically, the Chovot HaLevavot says you're not going to remind the ani, the poor person, of how much you gave him in tzedakah. Right? Since it's not your money and you were asked to give it, you're not going to seek his gratitude towards you, that he should be subservient to you for what you provided him because you didn't provide it. And his thanks and gratitude needs to be the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Now, it is true, as the shaliach of the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and as the means by which we are going to give tzedakah, he owes gratitude to us. But it's a gratitude that doesn't make him better. It's a gratitude that he fulfilled a mitzvah for the Kadosh Baruch Hu. So, in addition to that, he says that there are benefits of HaBitachon in our day-to-day lives as well, right? And specifically in how we should think about our nasa. So, understanding that the Kadosh Baruch Hu is in charge, and that what he does for us, that is a liberating experience, right? So he talks about that how you live your life, how you choose your profession, what you choose to do, and how successful your business is really not dependent solely, it's not dependent on you, right? And Yirmiyahu, the Nabi, says, if you look at source 10, he says, Baruch HaGever Asher Yiftach B'Hashem V'Haya Hashem Yiftacho. Right? Blessed, the real man who is blessed, the man who really has brachot from Shamayim, is somebody who has bitachon in the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and that's where he puts all of his trust. And it goes on, it says, V'Haya Ke'etz Shatul Al Hamayim. I'm just going to read the English because we have stuff to go through still. He shall be like a tree planted by waters, sending forth its root by a stream, right? Meaning he doesn't have to worry about water. It does not sense the coming of the heat. Its leaves are ever fresh. He has no care in the year of drought. It does not cease to yield fruit. And another benefit is that even if something difficult happens, something against his nature, right? Because he knows that everything comes from the Kadosh Baruch Hu, right? He can live the life of God has a plan. Now, I can feel you rolling your eyes in the top of your head. Really, because you're listening to this and you're saying, that's not the world I live in. Does this mean that I should really just sit down and do nothing and just wait for the checks to come rolling in? And my role in this is if I have enough bitachon in the Kadosh Baruch Hu, everything will work out. And the answer to that is no, obviously not. That's not what it means. What it means is that as we work through our lives, we need to understand that whatever happens to us is the result of decisions that God has made for us, and that ultimately He's doing these things for our benefit, right? And we just have to understand them in that way, even if we don't understand it, even if it's not really clear to us. There's a pasuk in Tehillim that goes, Keli, Keli, lama azavtani. God, God, why have you abandoned me? And the Hasidim say it's Keli, Keli, lema azavtani, right? My God, what is the purpose that I feel abandoned? What is it that you want to teach me? What is it? Why am I in this strait? Right? The Kadosh Baruch Hu will always provide for us, and he knows what we need, even if we don't. Right? Sometimes in retrospect, the best things that have happened in our lives is we didn't get what we desperately thought we wanted. Right? And it turns out he knew better than we did, even though we were certain. It means I shouldn't have the anxiety about the future, since I know whatever's going to happen is what the Kadosh Baruch Hu wants to happen. Now, there is a big controversy around this topic of bitachon and its expected outcome, right? There is an approach that if you have enough bitachon in the Kadosh Baruch Hu, everything will work out the way you want it to work out, right? And if it didn't work out, it is your fault because you're lacking in the bitachon. This idea is associated, but not exclusively, with kind of the Hasidic school of thought. But there's another school of thought, there's actually many, I'm just bringing kind of the counterbalance to that, by the Chazon Ish. So he says that this idea and approach is foolishness. He says that claiming that bitachon means that one is certain, batuach, God will come through for him, and anybody who doesn't believe with certainty that God will come through to him is lacking in this trait of bitachon, and that is the reason that bad things happen. He says this whole idea that I described is crazy. It's just not true. He says rather, bitachon doesn't mean that God will do what we want. There's no way we can make God do what we want. God's going to do what he wants. God will not do what we think is good, but what he thinks is good for the world in his grand scheme of things. So he says, but bitachon does not mean that, for example, someone ill believes he will recover, but rather that whatever happens is the will of God. He might recover, or he might succumb to his illness. A boteach, somebody who has bitachon, believes that whatever happens is for the best in God's divine plan, for reasons not necessarily accessible to human logic. A boteach does not have the faith that he will be saved from suffering or trouble, but he is certain that whatever happens is because divine providence, and not happenstance. Right, which means, if you take Rabbeinu Yonah, the believer is no more nervous in a war zone than crossing the street on a random Tuesday morning, because either way he knows he might live or he might die. But in any case, the Kadosh Baruch Hu is in charge, and his plan is the right plan. But in the end of the day, they both get us to the same place as the Chovot HaLevavot, because a true boteach is always serene in all circumstances, because he knows whatever happens, God wants it to happen. Okay, so what's next? Since this is a mitzvah we need to fulfill, we need to begin to think about and assess where we stand on the performance of bitachon in our life. Now, there's going to be an entire Sha'ar, an entire gate dedicated to this idea. It's called Cheshbon HaNefesh, which is accounting. But for now, where do we as individuals stand on this foundational and fundamental mitzvah? So on a scale of 1 to 100, how much do we really place our bitachon in the Kadosh Baruch Hu? And how much do we reserve for ourselves? So maybe a way to begin to gauge this is ask yourself, what is my general level of anxiety? Right? how much do I really feel that I am control and responsible for what's going on in my life, right? Not what I have to do, but in terms of the outcomes. So for me, I'm not going to go around the room, but I'll leave that with you for homework. I think I am on the Ronald Reagan level of bitachon. So Ronald Reagan was president of the United States. Okay. In 1987, the U.S. was negotiating a nuclear arms treaty with the then Soviet Union. The treaty was called the INF, Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. It was actually looking to reduce nuclear weapons. Talk for another time. President Reagan, in describing how he could enter into a treaty that required a level of trust that the Soviets were going to be true to their words, quoted an old Russian saying, which was actually popularized by Stalin and Lenin. My guess is there are few Shurim who quote Stalin and Lenin, so you are among the privileged. It is doverye non no proverye. I've now exposed the limit of my Russian. It means you can have trust, but it's incomplete and needs proof. He shortened it to trust but verify, right? Which is kind of in the middle where I find myself. I'm a work in progress. So where do we go from here? How do we grow and complete this level of bitachon that's demanded? So the rest of this Sha'ar is going to tell us what to do. So we're going to cover the criteria for placing our bitachon in someone, meaning what is required of us to put our trust in God, or in other people, prerequisite for placing your bitachon in God, when bitachon applies and when it does not, the difference between one who has bitachon in the Kadosh Baruch Hu, in terms of applying it to our day-to-day lives, the obligation to refute those who promote delaying the service of God until reaching sufficient material prosperity. When there was a movie called Jerry Maguire, there was a famous phrase, right, in that movie called, "Show me the money," right? So do we say to the Kadosh Baruch Hu, show me the money. You prove to me that you're going to deliver for me, and then I'll believe, I'll trust you, right? So how do we refute that argument? And then we're going to go into kind of a soul-searching discussion of what is it in our lives that are preventing us from doing this. So welcome back, everybody. Questions, comments? Great. Thank you very much. Well,
I do things and where the balance of trust and there's certain things that you that could not have a fear of what you might get, you might not like. You might trust it will happen one way or the other way, or how it happens. And there's the fear that of potential difficulties might be given to you or whatever, or tests.
Great. And that, I would imagine, stems from whatever I get. If I don't like it, it means that there are better things that I should be getting. Right? I'm not.
I don't think about her that I should be getting something better.
You just don't want this.
The fear of what one might have to go through.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I am not standing up here saying, well, I've reached this level, right? I understand. We have a couple minutes. I wasn't going to get into this, but there's one of the strangest, we went through on Parshat Yitro, we went to the Ten Commandments, right? Moses' hill came down last week, he smashed them. Anyway, one of them is lo tafmod, don't covet. Covet. Right. What does that mean? Why not covet? I mean, that doesn't, now, a lot of people say because coveting leads to stealing. If I covet what you have, I'm going to work to try and get what you have. but we have don't steal. They say, well, that's really don't kidnap. But it doesn't make any sense unless you look at it in this, right? When you covet, you say God got it wrong. God got it wrong. He gave you stuff he shouldn't give to me. This says, no. You have the stuff you're supposed to have. I have the stuff I'm supposed to have. If I have the stuff I'm supposed to have, then I'm not going to covet what you have. I'm not going to want what you have because it is the equivalent of the doctor gave me medicine for my condition and medicine for your condition, and I'm sitting saying, I want that medicine. And you say, well, it's not for you. I mean, what are you going to do with that? Right? That's not, all this is tailored for you. You have what you have because that's what the Kadosh Baruch Hu wanted you to have. And if you covet it, then you're denying that God knows what he's doing. That's a serious Ten Commandment piece.
So one question, when we go to a tzaddik or a big rav or a mekubal, and we get for brothel or whatever, and aren't kind of bypassing and having the HaBitachon in that Chovot, which is all part of that.
So I have my own opinion about going to tzaddikim for brachas. I have my own opinion about davening at kivrei tzaddikim for brachas. That's a shir for another time. It certainly has its adherents, that you have people who run to rebbes for brachas. If you believe that the tefillot of tzaddikim are listened to more than the tefillot of normal people, then you can understand it in that context. If you believe the bracha is coming from either the person who's in the cemetery as a permanent residence, or from the Rebbe himself, that's called avodah zarah. So it can either fit within bitachon, or it can. Okay, so let's leave it here.